Welcome back to the Informal Game. My name's Griff. I got Chris behind the camera. We're going to talk more about making dungeons, so stay tuned, because that's what we're going to do. Alrighty, so let's talk about dungeons some more. There's so much you can say about dungeons. There are a million videos out there talking about it. I don't know. I mean, I see a lot of video titles that are like this, the 5 steps you need to take to make a dungeon, or the things you shouldn't do when making a dungeon and stuff like that. And I don't think those are very useful. I think more just kind of theoretical type stuff, or even just simple rules are really useful for creating dungeons. If you want to learn about maps, I did that in another show a couple weeks ago, so there should be a little thing over here somewhere that you can click to go to the other show where I talk about map making. Today I'm just going to talk about what you put in the dungeon, and I always work off of these books because they're a good generic reference for you guys to see, and then you can use it, apply what I'm talking about to your own rules. So I'm not really saying you have to do what I'm doing or you have to play the rules that I'm playing. These are old rules, whatever. It's just what I know really well. But the concepts are what matters. And so that's kind of what I want to focus on. I kind of feel silly because I wrote a whole book with Dan Boggs and Greg Svensson about how to make dungeons. So you could go read that as well. But looking at the old rules, there's some interesting stuff in here. The books were set up in 3 stages. You've got basically your player's handbook here. That's your Men in Magic book. And you've got your monster manual here, and monsters and treasures, and you got your magic items in here. And then you've got this other book, which is called the Underworld and Wilderness Adventures. Let me just put it down here, and we can just kind of go over it. It looks like somebody got some inky fingers on my copy a long time ago, maybe even the printer. I'm just going to skim this. I won't read it all to you. The most important factor is that it goes into a section over here where it talks about rolling a die once you have your map, because they were really into procedural things back then, where you would just make a map and then you'd go in and randomly populate it with things. At least in the original rules. So it says to roll a die, and on a 1 or a 2, one of these guys. Ooh, it came up 1. Well, it says here, on a roll of 1 or 2 indicates that there's some monster there. It also talks about the use of the monster determination and level of monster matrix. That's kind of interesting too, because it talks about some things that kind of go against ideas that people talk about now, like the idea of balanced encounters, which is something that it took me literally 40 years to figure out, that encounters just shouldn't be balanced, and that it's the players that balance the encounters, because you always have 3 choices. You can talk to the thing, you can fight the thing, or you can run like hell. And run like hell is when you balance the encounter. You open the door and you see a dragon, you quietly shut the door and run like hell, and you've balanced the encounter. But if you look at the monster determination table, there's all kinds of lists down here of monsters that you can encounter. What's interesting here is that they have a die roll, and if you're on the first level of the dungeon, you roll a d6. It is entirely possible that you could roll a 6, 1 in 6 chance, and roll for creatures that are on the 4th level list here. Tonisborg has a set of wraiths, so I'm pretty sure that something similar to this was used to create Tonisborg, because there's a pair of wraiths on the first level of Tonisborg that just decimate parties. So that's kind of an interesting idea. We've got this game that isn't exactly balanced, and the idea is that the players are going to be balancing it by their decisions. The other thing about running a dungeon like this is that let me go back a little bit. It talks a little bit about how many places have a treasure. So if you roll again on a room, and on a roll of 1 to 3, you've got a treasure in that room. So that's kind of interesting, and then it gives you a list of sort of the size of the treasure, like level beneath the surface, and you're rolling like hundreds or tens, chance for gems. These are multiplied by a d6 again, so 300 gold and maybe, by 10. It's 30 gold and 500 silver. Anyway, that's kind of how we populated things back then. What is useful in these rules from that is that by the time I started playing, you would read the rules and you kind of learned as a dungeon master how to create encounters that were appropriate for the level of the dungeon that you were on, and you kind of learned how much treasure to put where. Some people were, I don't know, there are people that get obsessed with the procedural aspect of the original game, and while it's useful for populating areas that aren't necessarily important to your dungeon, maybe just extra rooms, the real meat and potatoes of a dungeon are the rooms that the dungeon master spends time crafting into really interesting encounters. And they're not necessarily even bad encounters. Maybe you open the door and you discover that you're in somebody's living room because there's like a fighter and his enchantress friend, and they live down there and they just hang out there. Or maybe they have an alarm and the door opens. There's like a little pressure plate and the players step on it and they hear a bell, and then the door opens and there's this lady and this man looking at them like, can we help you? But those kind of encounters are best really just created by the dungeon master. Wanted to talk some more about what else. I mean, I've talked about sort of how to populate it, what to put where. I don't want to talk too long because I think nobody really wants to listen to me talk about dungeons for 30 minutes. Maybe you can just think about those ideas. The main thing I am always really trying to push with my videos is that as a dungeon master, you get the most fun part because you're the one who creates things and gets to see how the players react. And the things you create shouldn't be, like the encounter shouldn't be fixed in stone. You just create the sense of possibility. And it's the players who come in and complete the thing. A lot of the newer modules are very linear. And so it's like you meet this person, they tell you to go over here, and you go over there, and maybe you fight a monster, and the monster has a map, and so you follow the map, and you end up over here. That's not how what I think an RPG game should be about. I think it should be a little bit more open to exploration. And so the dungeon master, what they're doing is they're just creating little sparks of possibility that the characters can wander around and discover. Really, the really in-depth part of what I talk about is in our book. If you're interested in more information about dungeon mastering and creating dungeons, Tonisborg is sort of a manual on making a dungeon, because it really talks a lot about how to do things as a DM. I think I'll leave it at that for today, and then maybe next time we'll talk a little bit about traps and treasures and monsters and things like that. I hope you found something interesting in today's show, and you can use some of that information in your own games. As always, I'm not fixated on you have to do it my way. I just like to throw some ideas out there, and maybe that'll spark some new ideas in your head, and you can take those ideas and run with them. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and hit the like button. Tell a friend. And if you want to talk to me, you can always leave a comment down in the comments section. We'll see you next time on The Informal Game.